Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of Biology in the Basement with your host, Mr. Andraco, special edition, worm edition, with your instructors, Charlotte and Emma. So they're going to teach us about the worms. So let's have a fact of the day so we can get started. And that is in Canada, up in Ontario, Canada, there was a city called Berlin. And in 1916, due to all the anti-German sentiment during World War I and eventually World War II, they changed their name to Kitchener. So they were Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. The funny thing is, you know what they were actually going to change their name to? Corona. That would be a funny thing. Who knew? Anyways, let's get started talking about the worms. So we've got our worms. Now this one gets a little bit tricky. There are multiple phyla that include worms. There's not just one big group of worms. They fall into different phyla. So what your information will be focused on is the earthworm, the annelids, but this is going to just kind of hit on some of that stuff, but that's what they've got. Just so that you know, when you see the subgroups, they're not all within one, like, worm phyla. It's a little complicated, but anyways, here we go. They are animals. They are in this specific phyla, and that's the one we'll talk about. So other phylas of animals that include worm-like things are our flatworms, called the platyhelminthes, the roundworms, and the annelids, which we'll focus on. These guys are the worst. If you ever want to see some disgusting videos, look up nematodes, because they are all parasitic. There are some tapeworms, right? That's where they fall in the annelids, but the nematodes are either parasitic to animals or parasitic to plants and things like that in the soil. Anyways, here is some basic information, right? They are multicellular. They are invertebrates. There is no skeleton. Okay, so for skeleton, just put Na. As well, worms are cold-blooded down on the other end. Probably should move that one closer to the basic information. Do they have brains? Yes, they have what's called fused ganglion, right? Ganglia are bundles of nerves, and they kind of fuse together to make a very simple brain. So yes, you could put simple brain and nerves for the sensory, or for the nervous system. We'll talk senses in a minute. The worms, they have 5 hearts. Well, technically they're called aortic arches, but they are 5 arching pumps that do circulate blood throughout the body. Their digestive system is continuous, right? Worms have food going in one end and coming out the other, so you can just put continuous for that. Worms do not have lungs or gills. They get their oxygen through the environment, through the process of diffusion, right? It goes right through their skin. If we're talking about external worms, worms that live outside the body. What did Andrico break already? Okay, moving on. Reproduction. They use external fertilization. The worms, they lay eggs, as well as they do not care for their young, nor do they nourish with milk. So for those last 4 squares there, right, they are egg layers. They have mostly external fertilization. They do not nourish with milk, nor do they care for their young. Where do worms live? Everywhere. They live in the soil, they live in the water, the ocean, inside of bodies, because they are parasites, right? They can be decomposers, they can be parasites. They are a very, very important part of the ecosystem, as well as a source of proteins. You also have to include, of course, for my credit, the adaptations, which they have many. Just how do they move, right? They have these cool bristles, even though they don't have much structure to them, so they can move and they can slither and they can get anywhere they want. So that's a pretty cool adaptation. Here are all your examples. Depending on the group, some of these are annelids, but if you want to get disgusting, you can look at some of these other ones like these ribbon worms, but I wouldn't. So, good job, Emma and Charlotte, teaching us about the worms. When we come back, we will hear about crustaceans.